Hello, dear listeners, and welcome once again to the Jewish Homesteading Project, audio show number 8. Today's topic will be, is 2023 the year of the recession? The answer will not shock you, as yes. Yes, it will be. Today we're going to be discussing several different things, but mostly centered around the new year and us knowing and being told that there will indeed be a recession. If we look over to some of our mainstream media content, we're already being told by numerous sources, and if you're not living on a rock, you've probably also heard, that we're either already in or close to being in a recession. This article from Forbes says that there will be recession either late in 2023 or early in 2024. That was written in November. We can already see those effects are changing things with the prices we're having in inflation. Is it a recession? Is it a depression? What's the correct term for it? That's not so much particularly important, and we don't need to argue semantics on that. What we do need to know is there are ways that it can affect us, and it can affect the way that we might want to live, take care of ourselves, be more self-sufficient, and be responsible for our own things in the world, our own way of getting by, our own parnasa as much as we can. Of course, Hashem gives parnasa, but that doesn't mean that we should make an effort and make the kalim, the vessels, to receive that parnasa. So we also have to do what we can to get by. I know, at least everyone listening, they go ahead and lift the fork up to their mouth and they lift the cup up to their mouth. So too, we have to be ready. We have to do our little bit in the great show that is the world and the creation. One thing we're seeing coming at us is tech layoffs. They've been talking in the news already in a few places here from this article in Wired, which was written on December 16th, we're seeing that there are thousands of tech layoffs already, and they're planning on more. Also, companies like Goldman Sachs are going to have layoffs. Meta, which is Facebook's owner, Amazon, a lot of companies, and of course Twitter, when Elon Musk took it over, have fired a bunch of their people. Some of those people might find jobs in other places. Some of them won't. And that also comes into part of what's coming, and that is that the Federal Reserve plans to sharply boost unemployment. This is from CBS News, an article written on September 30th of last year, 2022, saying that the Fed sees unemployment coming up and that that's kind of a good thing. It's part of the plan. But is that good for you? Well, that all depends if you're one of those 1% of people that are going to increase in employment. Estimated 1.2 million people that would lose their jobs. Now, the Parsha, of course, connects always with the times, and our Parsha last week brought Yosef talking to all the different residents of Mitzrayim and going over with them that they were running out of money and they had nothing else to buy their food with, and because they ran out of food, he started buying their cattle, their land, and they eventually became serfs to Pari. Except, of course, the Pasuk tells us for the priest, because these priests in Egypt had a certain allotment and they had their food taken care of, and they didn't end up losing their land and becoming serfs to Pari. Now, if we want to avoid that sort of serfs to Pari situation, we want to avoid situations where we have to struggle to get by or concerned about our food, one of the big things we can do is take into our own responsibility, our own food, our own mazon, our own parnasa, and do everything we can to insulate ourselves. Because as the pasuk shows us, there are some people who are getting by. Of course, also the pasuk doesn't, that particular pasuk doesn't mention that some of those people getting by were the Bnei Yisrael who Yosef had in Goshen, and they had a much easier time as well, until of course they were enslaved. What that teaches us is that we can take steps in our lives to have things like land and animals, that when we're not in a time of a particular drought or a particular famine, we'll be able to move forward and to have our own sources of things. So if things like recession, things like inflation, inflationary prices, things like possible job loss are all things that could affect you, these are a couple things that we could do. Number one, let's talk about our emergency fund. A lot of people are going to get tax money back, meaning money that you gave to the government and now they owe back to you because it turns out you don't owe so much to them. A lot of people are going to get tax rebates, quote unquote. Those monies would be best used instead of going out and buying a new TV or getting a new car or going on a vacation with something like an emergency fund. If you don't have an emergency fund, setting aside money, obviously the more you can set aside the better, but making your own cheshbon about setting aside money in case something happens, like chas v'shalom you get in a car accident, have to rent a car, chas v'shalom that any terrible thing should happen, there should be a hole in your roof and you have to call a roofer that day, a tree should fall in front of your driveway and you can't get your car out, and let's say that you're one of the people that doesn't have a chainsaw and axe and know how to use it, then you need to call someone right away to deal with that. You should have money on hand to take care of these problems. An emergency fund, Dave Ramsey backs it, a lot of smart people back it. It's always good to have some money around you in cash and in the bank just in case you need it. Emergency food. If you're going to spend all that money, you might as well buy something that's always going up in prices year by year statistically, and that's food. Inflation hits food hard. And if you buy food now, obviously, if it doesn't expire first, it will be worth more later on. Having emergency food supply is important. It not only can just save you a trip to the store, but also in cases like we had this year in Buffalo, it can really save you from having issues where you might be at home and you might get caught before a storm or something like that and realize, oh, we don't have a whole lot of options at home to eat. We're basically going to end up eating rice and canned oranges or something weird like that. If we have some emergency food, that comes in useful in those situations. But don't make the emergency food mistake. Don't go out and buy MREs and a bunch of stuff you don't like and a bunch of beans and rice and things your kids will never eat no matter how much you beg them, and they're going to be crying all night that they're hungry. Buy food that you use. Purchase food that you will use. In the words of someone wiser than me, eat what you store and store what you eat. Make sure that the food that you buy is something you can make use of, that you can use for your family, for your kids, and have an emergency supply of Shabbos food. Having food that you can eat on Shabbos that will remind you of Shabbos. Okay, yeah, if you have what to eat, you have what to eat. But it's a lot nicer when you have some things to remind you of Shabbos. If you have an extra thing of hummus in the fridge, an extra couple dips, an extra 1 or 2 servings of chicken, 1 or 2 meals of chicken that are in the fridge or the freezer, those are things that will help you have a much more fun time if you were to be snowed in, let's say, on a Shabbos from some lake effect snow like the poor people in Buffalo were. Because this particular economy is going to be hard on jobs coming up, think about your resume. It doesn't cost a whole lot to go out and prepare your resume. Just look over it. Add to what you've done in this past year. The year's come to an end. You've made accomplishments at work. What can you add on? What can you increase? What can you update? In case, chas v'shalom, you were to get that sort of message from work that you are being terminated or they are letting you go, be in a position where you can easily come out and apply. Think about jobs you might want to apply to, or other jobs that you might also be qualified and able to do that might make up for that lack of an employment position. Another thing is with your money. A lot of people are thinking, oh, the recession's coming, this is going to be a huge opportunity. And in some ways it will. And there will be opportunities for people that have a lot of cash on hand. But just be careful to not overextend yourself. You don't want to put a bunch of money into something, get all your cash tied up there, and then have it stuck. If you need money, if you might have a need for money, if you might lose your job, well, if you put all your money in some sort of fund or something like that, and then it's stuck there for 5 to 10 years or 30 years without paying some sort of penalty, that could hurt if you were to lose your job and need that money to get by for a couple weeks until your paycheck's caught up. So remember not to overextend yourself, even when you're looking for other things to move into and other ways to be self-sufficient. Speaking of self-sufficient, we should also become more self-sufficient. We should also look to be growing more of our own food. We should be looking to have things like chickens or ducks that can give us eggs. Specifically eggs, I mention, because although I've spoken before about the importance of having chickens, egg prices have gone up a lot. If you haven't noticed at the store, let me tell you, CNBC News has an article here written December 29th, 2022, and they're saying the egg prices have jumped 50%, and according to some metrics, even more. Now, the reason they cite is obviously avian flu and the culling of flocks, and they're saying, oh, it's just an act of God. Trust me, also, when avian flu comes out, there's a lot of the local flocks. If one flock has it, a lot of other flocks around it are culled. So it's not just that these chickens got sick and died, it's the chickens next to them got sick and died, and they were targeted for culling to prevent some sort of spread. So it doesn't take more than a couple chickens to set off a whole chain reaction that can quickly get a lot of the laying chickens killed according to the rules and regulations that the government has in place. But eggs that were $1.72 a year ago are now, according to this article, going for $3.59. And I've done a little bit of research over here. I went to a online website for a Jewish grocery store in Muncie, and the eggs there are selling for 10 cents above that price today. So eggs have definitely gone up. Eggs are something that you want to be sure that you can, if you are able to, save yourself some money on. If you eat eggs and you want to have chickens, that's not a bad idea. The only thing I would caution you with is don't spend a whole bunch of money on chickens. Don't go out and spend $300-$400 to get 4 chickens and a bunch of feed, because that's not going to save you money until way long term, and things can happen. The chickens are hard to feed. You know, sometimes they're annoying to feed. You forget to feed them. They could get killed by other animals that might be preying around, like coyotes or dogs or hawks. Each person has to take into account their own specific needs and wants, and whether they're even able to have something like chickens. But if you don't have chickens and you know someone who does, or you have a friend who's interested in getting, you can always team up, get in with them, and try to combine and do something like that. Maybe he could have 6 chickens, and 3 of them, you could take the eggs from, and 3 he could take the eggs from, and between the 2 of you, you can help bring your prices down a little bit. The great thing about chickens too is they're not super picky eaters. They'll eat your table scraps. If you work at a school or a shul, you can always drag over some leftover food from the kiddush that's getting thrown out. Say, oh, don't throw it away. I'll give it to my chickens. No baltashkas over here. It's going right back into the Shabbos meal when we make an egg salad for Shabbos day. Of course, with recessions, in any decrease in economic situations, we have to look out for rising crime. This year's comments by certain rappers who shall remain nameless, mainly because they keep changing their names, don't help anyone, and I have definitely seen that there has been an uptick in general animosity and anti-Semitism. So, as economic situations might deteriorate, unfortunately, a lot of times the Jewish people get blamed. So, keep an eye out for crime, for break-ins, for thefts, and even for violence. That sort of awareness can help you out a lot. I hope to post soon a gear review on a product that I purchased for the channel and also for my own self. I'm going to get that, take a look at it, test it out a bit, and let you guys know if it's going to be good, so look forward to that. Also, a little recently, some of my friends had issues where they were in different car accidents. I had an issue where I had a one-way accident with a deer, and in these cases, we all sort of looked back and reflected on the use of dash cams. I highly suggest that everybody have a dash cam in their car, at least pointing forward, if not one that also points either to the back of the car or inside the cabin. Those are useful for proving your innocence in situations where you're in a crash with someone and they lie. They can help you prove that the deer ran in front of you, that you didn't hit the post. They can help you prove a lot of things when it comes to these sort of issues, and insurance is one of those places where you don't want to get stuck. You don't want to be in a situation where insurance doesn't want to cover your car exactly, and they're going to jack up your rate so high that you're not going to be able to keep that car, or maybe you have multiple cars and the rate's going to be higher for all of them. You can save yourself a lot of money with $20-$30 spent on a basic dash cam, learning how to put it in and install it with obviously a memory card, so it has what to store, because if it's just running, it's not going to help you. It has to store something a little bit. And always get one that loops when it starts recording over what it had previously. These simple little things of preparation, just $20-$30 for a basic camera, it could save you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over time, and it could definitely save you headaches and arguing with the police about whose fault it was, whose fault it wasn't. These sort of things are great prevention measures to have, and sometimes you see crazy things on them, and then you can take it off and post it on YouTube for all your friends to see. We did have a question a while ago that was sent in, and I wanted to save it up for a questions show, but seeing as though it's been a long time and we haven't had a lot of questions come in, I'm going to go ahead and address it now. And that is the question of clearing your house. By that I mean clearing a house of potential antagonists, potential criminals, burglars. If you were to come home and you were to see that your home had been breached somehow, and you're not sure, are there people in the house? Are there not people in the house? Are there your people in the house? Are there not your people in the house? Could there be family members at home and you don't know? You're not sure if they're home or not. Should you go into the house? And this is a difficult question to answer. And it's really going to depend on a lot of factors. One, do you know how to clear a house? And what are you clearing it with? And what is your physical condition? What are your weapons? What's the potential threat? What's the potential gain? So what could be in the house? Who could be in the house? Could a kid be in the house? Could an elderly person who can't defend themselves be in the house? Or is it your bodybuilder, nephew who could be in the house? So who's the princess? What are you trying to protect? What's your dragon over here? What do we think could be happening? Do we see a forced entry? Do we see a smashed door, a smashed window? Like there's obviously a forced entry from a burglar? Or is, a window open? Or is the door a little bit ajar? If the door is a little bit ajar, you could have a situation where, someone was carrying groceries and they just forgot to come back and close the door. Which, of course, if you're ever coming in from outside, always close your doors behind you. Always lock your doors in your car. That should go without saying. But if a door has obviously been forced, if it's obviously been kicked in, if there's splintered doorpost, if the lock's smashed, if there's smashed glass in a window, you can tell that the window's been broken open and someone's gone inside or taken things outside. Then you maybe know you're for sure dealing with burglars. So assess first, how nice is your princess? Who would you be saving? Would it be the goldfish or would it be your grandmother? How bad is the dragon? Could it be that there's just, maybe, someone left the door open or the window open by mistake, or is there obviously a forced entry? And finally, how sharp is your sword that you have to do fighting with? Are you a prior military trained guy who's got a concealed carry weapon with them and they know how to clear a house and go in and take care of all the situation, and they're trained not only in firearms but also in hand-to-hand combat, so if the bad guy gets to jump on you around the corner, and grabs your gun, you'll still be able to struggle with him and beat him off? Or are you a older person who maybe isn't as physically capable to fight someone off? And if you were to walk in there with, the stick that you found on the ground outside, you're going to have a hard time physically struggling with someone to get them out. All these questions are questions you need to ask yourself in a short amount of time. Obviously, it's going to be different for every person, but if you don't have a lot of capability for fighting back, and there's not a huge risk for inside the house, then I think it might be wise to call the police, as long as you're not operating a secret marijuana grower or something in there. But as long as you don't have what to lose by calling the police particularly, I think a call to police in that case is definitely the right call to make. You're not necessarily going to be able to beat up a bunch of burglars. You're not necessarily going to save, a whole lot by going in there. There's not, a child who's in danger or an elderly person who's in danger of being harmed. That would probably be a cop call. Like if I come back with my wife, we come back from the store, the front of the house has obviously been breached. Am I going to go rushing in there and pull out my pocket knife and go Rambo on somebody? Probably not. I'm probably going down the road to my friend's house. I'm going to go drop off my wife. I'm going to get him. I'm going to get some of his guns. And we're going to come back together and we're going to clear. Because, my cat could be in the house. And, chas v'shalom, they could be doing something bad to my cat. But it's not worth risking my life and my wife's and putting us in a worse situation. On the other hand, if I were to drive up to a house and the door's obviously been breached, and I see my wife's car, and I assume she's inside, and I hear scuffling from inside, you can bet your bottom dollar that I'm going in. Because I'm prior military, have a little bit of training, I'm an able-bodied man, I could fight somebody off if I had to, and I normally carry, for work, I normally have a knife with me, and I could get a tire iron out of the back of the car. I would have some sort of, a shovel from outside leaning up against the house, I would have something to use to help me out. So, interesting question. It's a bit of a it depends answer, but sometimes things are, and it really depends on you, your situation, and what's at stake. So, how pretty is the princess? How bad is that dragon? And how sharp is your sword? Ask those questions, and if it's not coming up to the point where you need to get in there and you need to intervene, then yeah, call the cops. Unless you just absolutely can't have them come, you're really worried that the cops are corrupt here, or you're really worried that you're going to get in trouble for something in the house, then maybe you could consider calling somebody else. Call your friend, call your buddy, take your family over to somewhere else, come back with somebody else, do that with it, and then you can have your phone ready, to make the speed dial to 911 if you need to. With that being addressed, we're going to close out the show for today. Just remember, everybody, that if you want to get in touch with us at the Jewish Homesteading Project, you can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on Facebook. We have an email. So if you have questions, if you have comments, like and comment on the video. Let us know if you have questions. If we get enough questions, we can even make a question show. Tune in here to stay on the derech while going off the grid.